Never give up on your dreams, no matter how many times you fail. One Japanese man took this message to heart. The only issue was, his dream was to be a brain surgeon. And no matter how hard he tried, he just sucked at it. But that didn't stop him. He would never give up. No matter how many procedures he screwed up, no matter how many lives he ruined, he would be a surgeon. It's July 2019, and Matsui Hiroki has just been hired by Akko City Hospital, the only hospital in, well, Akko City. Akko is one of those small Japanese towns with not a lot going on. The biggest landmarks are the train station, a shrine, and the ruins of an old castle. Matsui had been recruited by Dr. Chiba, Akko's top neurosurgeon, who was impressed by his experience at Kyoto Memorial, a big hospital. While Matsui had technically never performed a surgery, Dr. Chiba was convinced that under his mentorship, Matsui could be a huge asset for his struggling hospital. Matsui, with cutting-edge techniques and 200 surgeries under his belt, as an assistant surgeon that is, leaves such a strong impression on Chiba that he immediately puts Matsui on his neurosurgery team. In his first week, Matsui is going to be the chief surgeon on a major operation, a brain tumor removal on a 30-year-old patient. Not only is the surgery a complete success, but Matsui completes it in record time. In the operating room, he insists that the surgical staff literally give him a round of applause for his achievement. Dr. Chiba is extremely impressed, but in the post-operative review, Chiba realizes the reason Matsui finished the procedure so quickly is because he only removed 20% of the tumor. Now, Chiba has to perform a second surgery just to clean up Matsui's mess, and fortunately the patient does go on to make a full recovery. For this story, that counts as a happy ending. Now, did Matsui learn anything from this mistake? No, actually he didn't even show up to the second operation. He apparently had something more important to do than brain surgery. This should have been Dr. Chiba's first hint that something was wrong, but instead, he decides to cut Matsui some slack. Starting any new job is hard, especially when that job is, again, brain surgery. Dr. Chiba had a good feeling about Matsui, and he knew everything was going to work out in the end. 2 months later, Matsui seems to be getting the hang of things, so it was time for another surgery. This time, Matsui would prove himself. Matsui's first case upon his return is an 83-year-old man presenting with paralysis below the waist. Matsui's diagnosis is hydrocephalus. Basically, the guy's got fluid in his brain. Is this diagnosis backed up by any tests? No, but it's fine. Just trust him, bro. Matsui tells the patient that surgery is going to fix all his problems and get him walking again. Okay, so the old man still can't walk after the surgery. Not only that, but now he can't even swallow, meaning that Matsui has done some serious damage. But Matsui just shrugs. I mean, it's not his fault, and there's nothing anyone could have done. That was his new catchphrase. By this point, Dr. Chiba was starting to get a little, concerned. He conducts a review of Matsui's cases, and what he finds shocks him. For one, Matsui was finding, or more like scouting, his surgical prospects during outpatient visits. Matsui's basically a used car salesman for brain surgeries. He'd diagnose the patients based more on gut feel than tests or evidence, sell them on the idea that his surgery would solve all of their issues, and then schedule them into the OR as soon as possible. None of that boring pharmacology stuff. Matsui just wanted to play operation. But Chiba isn't a confrontational guy, and he did, after all, hire Matsui, so he decides to just wait and see for now. A couple days later, Matsui treats a 43-year-old man with chronic nerve pain in his face. Matsui drills a small hole in the patient's skull to relieve pressure on the compressed nerve. Sounds simple, right? Nope, the patient wakes up from surgery and discovers he's now deaf on the drilled side. Once again, Matsui's response is, it wasn't the surgery. There's nothing anyone could have done. That same week, Matsui is called in to do a procedure called a clot retrieval on a 90-year-old stroke victim, Mrs. Yamada. This procedure requires him to insert a device called a catheter into the patient's cerebral artery. Matsui performs the surgery in a totally carefree manner, guiding the catheter like he's playing Subway Surfers. Mrs. Yamada suffers an intracranial bleed during the surgery and falls into a coma. Unfortunately, Mrs. Yamada would never wake up from this coma. A month later, she passed away. What's Matsui's reaction to this outcome? You guessed it, there was nothing anyone could have done. Matsui has now made 3 serious surgical errors in 8 days. For some baffling reason, Dr. Chiba still does not suspend his operating privileges. October 3rd, Matsui is scheduled to perform a cervical laminoplasty on Mrs. Saito, a 75-year-old woman with cervical spinal canal stenosis. In English, Matsui is going to widen her spinal canal with a drill. It sounds terrifying, but this is a fairly common and safe procedure. That is, until you remember this is Matsui we're talking about. Kimura, in the hospital's medical safety office, receives a call on the emergency line. She rushes to the operating room and finds Matsui in a visible state of shock. He had pierced the vertebrae at the neck, drilling directly into the spinal cord and completely severing it. The result was complete and irreversible paralysis from the neck down. He had turned Mrs. Saito into a quadriplegic. Now, would this be the thing that makes Matsui finally take responsibility for his actions? No, of course not. Instead, he desperately lashes out at everyone around him, going as far as asking Dr. Chiba to take the fall for him. And when that doesn't work, Matsui goes to his patient, or I guess his victim at this point, begging her to let him operate again to fix the issue. Yes, his solution was more surgery. She tells him to f off, so Matsui has her sent to a rehabilitation facility under the pretext that she has dementia. This is the caliber of person we're talking about here. A doctor who will paralyze you, completely ruin your life, and then ship you off to some warehouse to cover up his own tracks. Just as a reminder, all of this occurred within the span of 1 month. In the time it takes for your Amazon Prime trial to expire, Matsui has killed or permanently injured 4 people. And he wasn't about to stop. We'll get to that. But first, we have something much more important to talk about. The sponsor of today's video, War Thunder. War Thunder is the ultimate vehicle combat game that lets you take control of anything from biplanes and armored cars from the 1920s to modern fighters and main battle tanks. With over 2,500 tanks, planes, helicopters, and ships from 10 major nations, there's something for everyone. There are so many cool options in this game, and the level of detail blew me away. Not only do you have realistic graphics and authentic sound effects, but every component of every vehicle is fully modeled. The game even has an X-ray view that shows the exact trajectory of the shell and what components it blew up to take out the vehicle. I also really enjoyed the new mobile version for when I'm on the train. It's got super smooth controls and sharp graphics, and it's on both iOS and Android. So start playing War Thunder for free on PC, PlayStation, Xbox, or mobile and join a worldwide community of over 70 million players in epic PvP battles. Sign up using my link in the video description if you're new or a player returning after at least 6 months and get a massive bonus pack with multiple premium vehicles, the exclusive vehicle decorator Eagle of Valor, 100,000 Silver Lions, and 7 days of premium. This is a limited time deal available for PC and console users, so I'll see you on War Thunder. So it was clear by now that Matsui was not a good surgeon. Even from the beginning, there were a bunch of red flags that Dr. Chiba had just missed, or more likely ignored. Like, it turns out that even before hiring him, the head of the hospital, Dr. Fuji, had actually gone to Kyoto to discuss Matsui with his former bosses. They warned Fuji that Matsui was incapable of performing even basic medical procedures like staunching blood. Not only that, everyone at Kyoto absolutely despised him and thought he was a pain in the ass. This was not a surprise to the staff at Akko. I mean, Matsui's a complete mess there, too. He frequently sneezes right over patients in the middle of surgery. His desk is a pig pen. It's covered in papers, food, and even his own socks. One time, he was MIA for a surgery, and the staff found him in the parking lot showing off his new car. So why didn't anyone at Akko City Hospital stop him? Well, for some mysterious reason, Dr. Chiba simply refused to give up on Matsui. Despite everything he's witnessed, despite everything Matsui screwed up, Chiba still clung to the delusion that Matsui could be an asset to the hospital. And not to mention, it was hard to get any surgeon to work in Akko, even a bad one. But Chiba wasn't the only one who dropped the ball here. Akko Hospital actually has a medical safety office formed specifically to prevent these kind of incidents. But it was an open secret that the department was a joke. Medical safety positions here are treated like cushy landing spots for retirement age employees, and the department is staffed by former nurses, led by Kimura. While their job is ostensibly to prevent accidental injuries, in reality they have a vested interest in covering up any incidents and protecting the hospital's reputation. In the end, it's actually the clinical technicians who sound the alarm on Matsui. In December, a radiology technician files a complaint against him for exposing a patient to a dangerous dose of radiation during an operation. Allegedly, multiple doctors have to drag Matsui out of the operating room as he's shouting, "I'm a surgeon! He's my patient!" After this incident, more and more technicians, and now clinical engineers, are refusing to work with Matsui, forcing Dr. Chiba to second all of his surgeries. December, Matsui performs a cervical discectomy to treat an 89-year-old man's herniated disc. After the surgery, the patient completely loses the ability to swallow. January, Matsui installs a shunt in a patient's skull. A piece of the shunt breaks through the jugular vein and ends up in the patient's heart. Dr. Chiba has to perform a revision surgery to fix Matsui's mistake again. At a New Year's party, Dr. Chiba runs across Dr. Sugihara, Matsui's former mentor at Shiga Hospital. When Matsui's name comes up, Sugihara's face goes pale. "Don't you know?" he whispers. "Matsui was expelled from our neurosurgery department." Sugihara goes on to call Matsui a catastrophic neurosurgeon who treats surgery like cutting up a radish. Sugihara tells Chiba that he's actually being sued for a surgery where Matsui was his assistant. He says, "You need to get rid of him." But it's too late for Dr. Chiba. He's now completely paralyzed, a prisoner of Matsui's insane rampage. No matter what Matsui did, all Chiba could do was follow in his wake and try to pick up the pieces. January 22nd. Dr. Chiba's heart sinks when he learns that Matsui has pressured yet another patient into surgery. The patient is 74-year-old Mrs. Fukunaga, and the procedure is a laminoplasty, the same one that left Mrs. Saito paralyzed from the neck down 3 months ago. "Please let Matsui learn from his mistakes," Chiba pleads. Knowing that Matsui's grasp of anatomy is tenuous at best, Chiba tries to tell Matsui exactly what he needs to do. "Drill here," Chiba says, pointing at a vertebrae. Matsui drills, but the patient starts bleeding, constantly bleeding. He calls for more suction, but it's no use. Blood is now seeping from everywhere. Matsui is confronted by his greatest weakness, the inability to staunch bleeding, the one skill that every surgeon needs. The operating field is a sea of red as sweat rolls down his face. Matsui is in complete despair. He knows he has to continue the surgery, so the only thing he can do is pick a spot and drill. A sickening silence. Even Matsui can feel that something is wrong, because his drill hits something that is definitely not bone. Dr. Chiba looks over and lets out a little whimper. Matsui has made the exact same mistake as last time. He's drilled into the spinal cord, and this time the damage is so bad that the patient's nerves look like a ball of yarn. There's actually video footage of this surgery. Yes, it really looks like a ball of yarn, and no, you really don't want to watch it. Trust me. The footage ends with Matsui literally just stuffing the nerves back into the hole he drilled and hoping for the best. This was Matsui's most serious surgical error yet, and it would later come back to haunt him, but for now, all he got was a slap on the wrist. A month later, he was back at it. He was going to perform another brain tumor removal, the very first procedure he failed at Akko. Last time, Matsui had left 80% of the tumor intact, but this time he had a plan. See, Matsui treated surgery like a carnival game. Threw the ball too hard last time? Well, switch to underhand. Left most of the tumor intact? This time I'll keep cutting until I cut out so much healthy and functional brain tissue that it leaves the patient in a persistent vegetative state with zero hope of recovery. It's only been 8 months since Matsui started working at Akko Hospital, and he's been involved in as many serious medical errors. In 2 of the 8 cases, the patient had lost their life. This was the last straw. The hospital's entire surgical staff now straight up refuses to work with Matsui. As the chief clinical technician put it, "I don't want to be involved in another murder." The medical safety office calls the director of the hospital, Fuji, in a panic. Only now they're beginning to realize the severity of the situation and how much trouble they're in when the public finds out. Kimura, Fuji, and Chiba all start arguing and pointing fingers at each other, but there's one thing they agree on. Matsui is to immediately be banned from all surgeries. The nightmare is over. Or at least, that's what they thought. But the story is about to get truly, truly insane. You see, Matsui was going to fight this. His dream was to be a surgeon, and he would never give up. No matter what. Matsui has essentially barricaded himself in one of the hospital's conference rooms. It's been weeks since he's seen any patients, and at this point, he gives all of his instructions to nurses via text. Ako Hospital has no right to take away my surgical privileges, he angrily mutters to himself. I've done absolutely nothing wrong. Therefore, the only logical explanation is that someone at the hospital was out to get Matsui, and that person was obviously Dr. Chiba. Yes, the person who bent over backwards for him the entire time, cleaning up all of his messes, was out to get him. Matsui begins plotting his revenge. His first act is to author a report detailing every single surgical error he's made, or rather, every single surgical error he hasn't made. Matsui's report is a treasure trove of fake data and blatant lies. You see, none of his patients ever suffered any side effects, and if they did, it was in no way his fault. Most critically, Matsui places the blame for all of his errors squarely on the head of Dr. Chiba, claiming that it was all because of his lack of supervision, or in some cases, even claiming that it was Dr. Chiba actually holding the knife. Most surprisingly, perhaps out of shame or sheer resignation, Dr. Chiba actually signs off on the report. Just like that, Matsui is absolved of all responsibility by the Medical Safety Office. But it's a hollow victory, because the hospital still won't lift his surgery ban. So he needs to get creative. Matsui realizes that even under a surgery ban, he can still operate if he happens to be the only doctor around when a surgery occurs. One night, Dr. Chiba receives a call from the hospital. The doctor on the line is in a complete panic. Matsui was on call that night and took a patient into the OR for an emergency catheter surgery. Like a demon who's been sealed away, Matsui has escaped his prison to wreak havoc. Dr. Chiba rushes to the hospital and stops the surgery immediately, but the patient's condition still deteriorates the next day. Of course, this incident only intensifies Matsui's hatred for Dr. Chiba. After everything horrible Matsui's done so far, what he does next is so revolting, so deranged that it can only be described as pure evil. You see, Matsui decides that the best way to get back at Dr. Chiba is to drag him down to his own level. Since Matsui's banned from surgery, he follows Chiba into surgeries as his assistant, then spends the entire procedure berating Chiba and telling him that he could do better. Yeah, it's not enough that Matsui's the worst surgeon alive, he's now heckling other legitimate surgeons. Eventually, Chiba relents and gives Matsui the knife, because of course he does, and Matsui gives the patient a lung contusion, because of course he does. For once, Dr. Chiba learns from his mistakes and doesn't give Matsui the knife anymore. So what does Matsui do? He gives up and reflects on his mistakes. No, just kidding, of course he doesn't. Instead, he literally barges into one of Dr. Chiba's surgeries and tries to knock the drill out of his hand so that it'll look like Dr. Chiba injured his patient. Let me repeat that. A surgeon went into an operating room in order to sabotage a surgery. But somehow it gets even worse. Somehow Matsui's not done. Not satisfied with just ruining Dr. Chiba's career, Matsui decides to sue the hospital for taking away his surgery privileges and tries to get Dr. Chiba arrested. Remember that completely fake report Matsui wrote? Using that report, Matsui claims to be a whistleblower with evidence that Dr. Chiba was not only guilty of criminal malpractice, but that Chiba and the hospital were framing him to cover up Chiba's crimes. He goes as far as to claim that Dr. Chiba had tried to murder him by pushing him down a flight of stairs. None of this was true, of course, but due to the hospital's appeasement and cover-up of his crimes, the evidence was actually on his side. The police have no choice but to open an investigation and place Dr. Chiba under arrest. Finally, after being interrogated for hours by the police, Dr. Chiba has reached his breaking point. He releases every record he has, every single email from Matsui where he's crying, throwing a tantrum, begging Dr. Chiba to take the blame, and trying to put the fault on someone, anyone else. Matsui is utterly humiliated by this and withdraws his lawsuit, but he has one last trick up his sleeve. He goes straight to the hospital's director, Dr. Fuji, and says, "Maybe I don't have enough to bring down your hospital, but I can make everyone here's life miserable. Don't say a word about what I've done here to anyone. If you do that, you'll never see me again." Fuji is terrified, and seeing an opportunity to finally be rid of Matsui, he makes another deal with the devil. Matsui resigns. At this point, it seems like Matsui has won. Despite being the worst doctor alive, despite ruining countless lives and throwing everyone who tried to help him under the bus to save his own ass, he's gotten away scot-free. And that would be the case if he had just retired then and there. But remember, Matsui is a surgery junkie. He's a medical terrorist, and his only purpose in life is to spread malpractice and misery to as many people as he can. And that misery was finally about to catch up with him. Matsui happily starts his new job at Suita Tokushukai Hospital, where he works in the emergency department. He's no longer a neurosurgeon, thankfully, but he plans to take a specialist exam for catheter surgeries in a few months and get right back on the saddle. Remember, this is the procedure that he botched so badly that he killed a 90-year-old patient at Akko. Within a week of Matsui arriving, something strange and incredible happens at the hospital. Everyone notices that Matsui doesn't know how to practice medicine. Then again, it's kind of hard not to notice when you're holding a patient's lips and Matsui keeps accidentally pricking your fingers with the needle instead of stitching the patient's mouth together. Yes, this actually happened. Just for fun, let's go over a few of the numerous errors Matsui made during this time. He sent a woman with a broken jaw home without treatment, attempted to administer an IV of adrenaline to a patient not in cardiac arrest before the staff stopped him, left used syringes contaminated with hepatitis C on a patient's bed, and forgot to give a 90-year-old man dialysis for 3 days, leading to his unfortunate death. These are excerpts from 50 pages of incident reports filed against Matsui. Yeah, like I've mentioned, by some miracle, the staff at Suita don't follow the Akko playbook and sweep these accidents under the rug. In fact, Matsui quickly becomes a joke at Suita and eventually has to resign. After leaving Akko, he would never find steady employment again, just bouncing from hospital to hospital. Matsui also ends up failing the catheter exam he was practicing for, not just because he was incompetent, but because it turns out, surprise, surprise, he fabricated dozens of surgical records. Yeah, it turns out those 200 surgeries as an assistant was a blatant lie, and he had been in 30 to 40 at most. And his troubles didn't end there. Remember how I said Akko is a small town? Well, in small towns, people talk, and Akko Hospital had gained a local reputation as the hospital where people get worse, not better. Yeah, that's pretty fair. Naturally, the press started asking questions, and the spattering stream of reports quickly became a waterfall. The hospital's administration tried their best to quash these reports and deny any wrongdoing, but that ended as the lawsuits came in. It all ended with the hospital losing their neurosurgery accreditation for all of this mishandling of post-incident safety reviews. The walls were closing in around Matsui now. Everywhere he went, people recognized him as that really terrible doctor from Akko. The NHK even made a documentary about the string of medical incidents at Akko Hospital, where he was identified in all but name. The final nail in the coffin came with a civil suit filed by Mrs. Fukunaga, the patient who Matsui left paralyzed below the waist with his drill. Mrs. Fukunaga and her family made several media appearances, telling interviewers that Matsui's surgery left her incontinent and in constant pain. Finally, on December 29th, 2024, 5 years after his reign of terror at Akko Hospital, Matsui Hiroki was indicted and arrested for professional negligence causing injury. They finally got him. As Matsui was awaiting trial, people began asking some difficult questions and getting shocking answers. Like, how could something like this, or someone like this, terrorize the healthcare system and get away with it for so long, especially in a highly developed country like Japan? Many experts believe that there's a crisis going on at rural hospitals there, where they can't attract talent and struggle just to keep the lights on. This was definitely the case at Akko Hospital. I mean, according to whistleblowers, administrators were booking as many surgeries as they could and desperately cutting costs just to stay out of the red. Other experts point to Japan's lax medical safety laws, which don't penalize surgeons or suspend their medical licenses based on the number of accidents they've caused. In fairness, it can be very difficult to determine whether a surgeon is negligent or incompetent, because every case is so different and every procedure has a different level of risk. Also, surgeries are done by a team of doctors, nurses, and technicians, so it can be hard to attribute an accident to a single person's mistake. I mean, sometimes it's even hard to determine whether a surgery was a success or not, so it can take years and dozens of surgeries for patterns of error statistics to appear. Part of what made Matsui so hard to catch was that he wasn't making massive, isolated errors. He was, by all accounts, just really, really bad at surgery. But the most troubling part of this story isn't the systemic problems in Japanese healthcare, and it's not even the deranged monster putting his ego above the lives of innocent people. Evil exists, but it's ultimately an aberration. The vast majority of doctors are people we can and should trust. No, the most disturbing thing about today's story is that so many of those competent, experienced doctors who frankly had every motivation to speak out just stood by and did nothing, over and over again. But there's something very strange about this story. If you've heard about this case from the media, you might have noticed that there's a huge part of the story I skipped. It's because I can't cover it on YouTube. So I've explained the specifics in the follow-up video, but first, a massive thank you to War Thunder for sponsoring today's video. Make sure to check out War Thunder now for free on PC, PlayStation, Xbox, or on mobile, and use my link in the description to register. If you're new or haven't played in 6 months, you'll also get a bonus pack across PC and console with multiple premium vehicles, in-game currency, and more. Anyways, I've told the rest of the story in the part 2 video, which is available for free in the description. It's on Patreon, but you don't have to sign up to watch it. Speaking of patrons, thank you so much to all of my patrons for supporting me and making my videos possible in the first place. And finally, thank you so much to Eli and Liv for doing the art in this video. It seriously would not have been possible without them. Thank you guys so much. See you guys next time, and I love you. Bye-bye.